Greetings, this is Obi-Wan Kenobi, and I have drifted into the underworld. The Star Wars underworld. I have a bad feeling about this.
Here we go. We must go to the lower levels. The underworld.
You've taken your first step into a larger world.
You're after something.
Ben.
Since I've started the underworld, I've met so many great friends.
Chris.
I grew up in the 1990s, and mall packaging is nostalgic for me.
Dominic.
What I love most about Star Wars is that it's fun, and it's all-round good times.
So, this is where the fun begins.
May the Force be with us.
This thing really moves!
Whoa! I like this!
I can't believe you came all this way to see me.
What's up, Star Wars fans, and welcome back to another episode of the Star Wars Underworld podcast. We are your source for the latest breaking Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion each and every week. And on this episode, we're going to be talking about the Season 1 finale of Star Wars Andor, Rix Road. My name is Chris, and joining me on the episode is my good friend, Mr. Dominic Jones.
Hello, Chris. Hello, Hannah. Hello, everybody. Yeah, what a finale. What a season. What a great time Andor has been. I've really enjoyed this season. I'm really sad that it's ending, but I'm a little bit glad for the sake of this show that it's done, because in the time that Andor has been on, some of the biggest Star Wars news stories of the year have all dropped, and it continued this week with one that isn't just a Star Wars one, but it's a Disney one and an entertainment industry as a whole one. And yeah. The old Bob is now the new Bob, and the old Bob is the new Bob, and they got rid of a Bob, and the chairman of the Bob changed, and they all in favor said Bob, and there's somebody else named Bob, and is looking for a new Bob to replace the old Bob, who was the old new Bob. So I don't know what any of that means, but we'll talk about next week. It'll be exciting. It'll be good. But for now, I'm just excited to talk about Andor.
It's so confusing to me because after this happened, like, there were a couple things. One, I was like, well, wasn't like Bob Iger still running Disney anyway? He just didn't have the title of CEO,
basically.
Like,
it's
like a title change, but it's like I remember he like retired and then he came back as like another role, and he was basically running things
because he stepped down as CEO.
Yeah,
at the beginning of 2020, stepped down in like February.
Yeah.
So just in time for COVID.
Yeah.
But he's stuck around in some sort of like key advisory thing to sort of see through the transition. And he had officially stepped down at the beginning of this year, basically.
That makes sense.
Sort of January, February, March of this year. And so Chapek had been running the show himself for really less than a year before the board went, nah. You're out. We want the old Bob back. And as I'm sure we'll discuss in the weeks to come, can kind of see why. Dude made some controversial calls. And, there's a Bob Iger, as much as I hate to sit around and praise a CEO, there is something special about that guy. He really seemed to know what he was doing, both on the business side and on the sort of PR side, which Bobby C never really figured out, especially the PR side. So I don't know. What it means for Star Wars is a fascinating question, and people have been making up all sorts of BS about it this week with, Kathleen Kennedy is safe. She's fired. She's getting a contract extension. She's retiring. I think it's business as usual for Lucasfilm. I think this is I don't think this really relates to Star Wars much. I think this is a much bigger Disney corporate thing, but we'll have time for that and the cast of the Acolytes and all sorts of other fun stuff, movie rumors and all that stuff next week. For this week, we got to talk about this Andor finale, which is what it's all about.
Also joining us, it's Hannah from the Raeside.
G'day there. It's great to be back for another show, and yeah, what a finale. Lots of talk after the finale. I've been enjoying the social media aftermath of the finale. There's nothing like Twitter after a Star Wars show finale. So much happens. And I've had a very niche Star Wars tweet go semi-viral, which I'm so proud about, because the tweet was, but seriously, who is Uncle Harlow? We didn't get that answer. We didn't get it answered. But clearly, there's like 2,500 people that are asking the same question of who is Uncle Harlow? That's what I wanted to know from the finale. But yeah, it's always a special time at a Star Wars show finale. But yeah, it's going to be a good time. It's going to be a good chat.
Maybe the real Uncle Harlow is the friends we made along the way.
Ah, lovely.
There's always that one character in the show that only gets mentioned and never is on screen, and I think Uncle Harlow is that character.
He's that guy.
There's always one.
Uncle Harlow, the Star Wars story. Come on, I want it.
That's what Bob. That's what Bob Iger's coming back to make is like, yeah, I've been watching Andor, and I need to know more about this Uncle Harlow character, and so we need a movie about him. We need a movie about him. And my favorite part of the movie will be when we find out what his name is, because he'll go up to
it'll be Bob. It'll be Bob Harlow.
Bob Harlow, yeah.
Of course.
Yeah. Yes.
He'll go up to an Imperial and be like, and the Imperial's like, "What's your name?" He'll say, "It's Bob." He'll say, "What's your last name?" He says, "I don't have one. I live a hard and low life." And I'll go, hard low. Harlow. Bob Harlow. And you know what? From now on, you're an uncle. Uncle Harlow. And then he'll sign him up.
What?
And
anything can happen.
We'll get a movie about him that looks like it's setting up a trilogy, but no one will go see it. So we won't get a follow-up.
Shocking.
Uncle Harlow, a Star Wars story. See it in theaters.
This December.
This never.
Oh my goodness. It's gonna be a video game. That's what it's gonna be. You get to play
video game.
Uncle
I
Harlow,
love
yes.
it.
Video game. What kind of video game would it be?
It would be Grand Theft Starship Streets of Coruscant.
Oh, okay.
Gonna jack some starships.
I like it.
Speeders.
I like it. That's what Uncle Harlow is doing. That's
his day job.
That's his day job.
Apart from finding out work for his estranged family members.
Yeah, he's stealing cars by day and getting jobs at the security bureau by night. Or what was he? Where did he work? The statistics bureau? What was it?
The
Bureaus of Standards and
Standards. Yeah.
There we go.
There you go.
Love that. All right, so we're gonna get into Rix Road in just a second. Real quick, we want to remind everybody to punch that subscribe button if you haven't. You can support
for more
us.
Great content like this.
Yes, you can super chat with us and also become a channel member. Please leave us a review on any apps that you're listening to us on, and we have a link in the description to our Discord server, which you can join. That's how you get the link every week to our exclusive pre-shows that we do for our Discord community over there. And also you can follow at the SWU and Hive now. Check it out.
Yeah, sure. Because that's what we need is another social network. Yeah, that was a Ben Hart special. So by the way, Ben's not here if you can't tell, but he may grace us with an appearance later in the show.
Because
Ben's going, guys?
It's because Ben's secretly the person who runs Hive, so he's a little busy.
You know who runs Hive? Uncle Harlow.
Yes. It's two. There's two founders, so it's Ben Hart and Uncle Harlow. Those are the two guys.
With Uncle Harlow. I love it.
Uncle Harlow. Yeah, Ben's been holding out on us for weeks. He's known Uncle Harlow.
That's right. They're working together very closely.
He won't tell us.
This is the best joke to continue ever.
All right, let's get into it. Let's talk about the Andor finale. We are, of course, talking about season 1, episode 12, Rix Road, written by Tony Gilroy and directed by Benjamin Caron. We will go around the table, give our initial impressions of the episode. And since Ben is not here, Hannah, we're going to throw it to you first.
Yes.
What'd you think? What did you think of the Andor finale?
Yeah, let's get into it. The Andor finale was very good. I think I went into it, if you've listened to many of these episodes before, I've had a very mixed reaction of emotions to the season. It's like sometimes I'm like, oh, this is really cool of Andor, but then other shows have been like, yeah, that was Andor. Like, okay. And I think I kind of set myself up appropriately for this finale. I didn't get to like, oh, we're gonna get a massive thing happen. But I was kind of, coming into it very expecting something meaningful, but not as massive to unfold. And I'm glad I did that because it actually made the action sequence that was in this finale very good for me. And I really enjoyed the build up. I know a couple of people online have been talking about the marching band, the Rix Road band. I love it. I kind of very much liked that element. I think the contrast of diegetic and non-diegetic sound in this show is just so perfect, and it made for a really great tension building, suspense building. And the second we see that introduced, I was like, okay, here we go. Something's going to happen. And, they only let 30 people into the funeral, but suddenly there's like 500 people. Oh my God, there's going to be a big fight happen. So I really enjoyed the tension of this episode. I've got a few, again, nitpicky things here and there of like, oh, I didn't get this thing or didn't, latch onto this idea. But overall, I enjoyed this finale. I thought it was very, very Andor. It was very fitting to the whole aesthetic and vibe of the show, and I enjoyed watching it. Yeah.
Good. Nice. Chris, what about you? What did you think of Rix Road?
I felt like they did a really good job of tying everything together in the finale, because you had all these different stories that were kind of happening simultaneously, and you were kind of wondering why they were taking the time away from the main story for certain things. Like, for instance, all the Syril stuff. The question was like, how is this guy gonna play into everything? So having him there and having him save Deidra was really interesting. So that kind of makes that whole thing make sense. Things with Mon Mothma continued to escalate. So all the time that they spent putting into her backstory and her family's backstory makes sense. I mean, she's basically now framing her husband. I mean, but Mon Mothma has gone full Sith, basically.
Oh yeah, fully.
So that was pretty intense. So I thought that kind of storyline got to a really fascinating climax, and I just really like the realism of the rebellion. I mean, this stuff on Ferrix is very similar to a lot of rebellions that have like happened in real life. You can tell that they're taking a lot of inspiration from stuff like the Daughters of Ferrix are kind of like the Sons of Liberty, which are the kind of American revolutionary network in the early days of the American Revolution. You had kind of incidents like the Boston Tea Party, and the grand theft that happened on Aldhani. And now in this episode, you got something that's kind of similar to the Boston Massacre, with there being a riot and people getting shot. Like, it's very similar to that. So I mean, obviously that's American centric, but because that's the history that I know, because that's where I'm from. But lots of revolutions in many countries kind of start that way, with those types of similar type organizations and similar type events happening, with riots and a big act of defiance and people speaking out. I mean, Marva speaking out, and like the manifesto that Cassian, now we know, is reading, and that keeps that storyline going that was introduced earlier, that we were wondering when it would come back. Like, that's similar to like, Thomas Paine in the early, revolutionary writings, and even like Voltaire in France to talk about Europe and stuff. So like, I think it's really cool that there's so much kind of realism in the mechanics of what's going on. And I felt like it was just cinematically executed really, really well. And it was a very emotional episode. I mean, like, Bix, kind of huddling against the side of the window and like crying during Marva's funeral procession. I mean, that was like a really intense moment. There was just a lot of stuff like that in this episode. So I thought it was a very satisfying ending to the season.
that, you know, doesn't wipe too much off the table for the next season, because most of the main characters are still around and a lot of the tension that exists between them are still there. But you just got those major moments with things paying off, and now, you know, we have finally Cassian, you know, actually offering to join the rebellion, and that's basically that origin story was this season. So really cool episode. I thought it was a great ending to the season.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think what we're seeing in this episode is something that I really like about Tony Gilroy's writing, which is that he's writing Star Wars that isn't inspired by other Star Wars. Because as much as I love a good Star Wars reference, and a lot of people do those very, very well, and I'm not knocking that as a way of telling your story, referencing back to other stuff within the saga. I feel like this episode, there is a universality to it that is sometimes missing from stuff that is too Star Wars focused in its writing. And I look at all of some of the big dialogue moments from Nemec and Marva in particular, the recordings in the episode. And you read those or you listen to those. Yeah, they're talking about the Empire, but they could be, like you said, Chris, they could be applied to any number of historical movements, could be applied to stuff going on now. It makes it really, really powerful. And I think, you know, we sometimes forget that some of the most iconic lines in Star Wars are iconic because they were written to be universal. They were written at a time before you could reference another Star Wars line. You know, one of the most famous pieces of advice in Star Wars is "do or do not, there is no try," from Yoda. And that has since been referenced time and again in other Star Wars storytelling. But the reason it works so well is that line isn't just Jedi advice. That's just good advice. And I think the reflections on rebellion that we get from Marva and Nemec in particular, but other characters as well in these episodes, are just that. They're reflections on rebellion, not necessarily the Rebel Alliance. They apply to the Rebel Alliance. They work in the story because they fit with what we know to be the Rebel Alliance. But it's so much more. And you know, this is something that's been a bee in my bonnet for many years now, which is the Rise of Skywalker's lack of a final piece of advice. And I know I've said this before, and so I won't spend too much time on it. But I feel like this, if you ever wanted to draw a distinction in new Star Wars between someone writing for universality and someone writing for a Star Wars reference, you compare this, what we get in this episode, these reflections on rebellion, to Luke's grandiose piece of advice to Rey of confronting fear as the destiny of a Jedi, which is okay. Yeah. It's okay. Not terrible. It's not the worst thing I've ever heard by any stretch of the imagination, but it doesn't have the same kick that some of these lines from Marva and Nemec have, you know, like, I've written down some of these, like, you know, Marva's line, "There's a wound that won't heal at the center of the galaxy. There's a darkness reaching like rust into everything around us. We let it grow, and now it's here. It's here, and it's not visiting anymore. It's a stay. The Empire is a disease that thrives in darkness. It's more alive. It's never more alive than when we sleep. It's easy for the dead to tell you to fight, and it's true. Maybe fighting isn't possible. Perhaps it's too late, but I'll tell you this: if I could do it again, I'd wake up early and be fighting these bastards from the start." Like, it's like yes, it says Empire in there, but that could be anything. It doesn't have to just be the Galactic Empire. So, I'm sure we'll come back to that with many things. So that's what made this episode stand out to me, and that's what I think this season has done really, really well, while also slipping in some sweet connections for a connection corner every episode that we can bring on as well. So I think Andor start to finish has been a tremendous ride, a tremendous accomplishment, and yeah. I'm a little bummed it's gonna be 2 years till we get another season, and I'm especially bummed that it's gonna be the last one. And Chris, you said just about every character survives, and so we get to revisit them in season 2. I feel like that's where you can really feel in this episode that this wasn't planned to be the halfway point in the story.
Oh yeah,
originally,
and it's not too late, Bob Iger.
They've started shooting. They started shooting this week, so
that's fine. Start shooting and do the episodes as the premiere of season 2 that were always going to be the premiere of season 2. But stop! Don't film the 3rd episode or whatever that was going to be originally the premiere of season 3. Just keep making season 2.
Yeah,
and push that other stuff till 2026.
Tony Gilroy and Diego Luna are somewhere going, God, he's trying to kill us. He's trying to kill us.
I mean, that's like trying to make The Crown like a 2-season show. It's like the first season's all about like young Elizabeth and ascending to the throne, and then season 2 is bang, like her entire life.
Yeah, has there ever been a show that's been structured quite like this, where you get a really in-depth year and then 4 years just skimmed over?
I mean, I will only accept it if each episode's like 2 hours long.
Yeah, it's like a movie per episode.
Yeah. Then I would say, okay, runtime, it's more than a season's worth. So I'll give that to them.
12 2-hour episodes.
Yeah.
You want 24 hours. You want a whole day of Star Wars.
Yes. That's what I want to binge it in an entire day. Yes.
No sleep. Yes,
that Andor. Sounds great. I mean, at this point, the Star Wars marathon, just movies, is starting to get to be that length. So
it's up there. Yeah. I do sort of hate that everything. We're gonna look at everything from now on as, is this the original plan? Or is this the updated 2-season plan? Because like I look at the way a lot of these arcs ended, with Mon Mothma and her daughter, with Syril and Deidra, with Luthen and Cassian, even just with the Ferrix crew on the ship escaping. And I feel like there's so much story in all of that. There's so much story left to be told. And Tony Gilroy has said we're going to pick up season 2 a year later. And I feel like a lot of that's going to be left to our imagination, which, isn't necessarily a bad thing. I'm okay with some things, some questions being left unanswered, some things being inferred or implied. But man, when you know the original plan was to do a lot more, you kind of want to see the more in-depth version. Like I feel like if they were doing a 5 or even a 3-season plan, I feel like we would come back next season and we would get sort of the awkward first days of Syril and Deidra really working together. Whereas I think we're going to come back next season and it'll be a little awkward, but they'll have more or less figured out their working relationship by the time we check back in a year later. But c'est la vie. It is what it is. Where do we want to start? Let's start with Mon Mothma. I want to start with Mon Mothma.
Yes.
Oh, she's evil now. Mon Mothma's evil. What?
Evil. She's smart. She's clever.
She's selling her daughter into slavery and framing her husband for something she didn't do.
I mean, I feel like
when you say it like that.
I mean, Chris, we'll start with you. What did you think of how they wrapped up the Mon Mothma storyline for this season?
I mean, it makes sense based on everything that they've shown before. Like, they've very much pit Mothma against her family. The entire lead up to this episode was all the reasons why she was at odds with her family. So it makes sense that it would end up with. What's funny about it is that we kept hypothesizing that this meant that they were going to turn on her. right? We kept thinking that somebody's gonna rat on her, that like her husband or her daughter are gonna like go to the Empire and tell them that she's a rebel or something. Like, that's kind of where what we were hypothesizing, but no, she's turning on them. She's throwing them under the bus for her gain and for the greater good, and taking a huge page out of Luthen's book. And that's like a really massive change for a character, even in one season. From going from disagreeing with the Aldani heist and thinking that it was, too much too soon and not the best way to run a rebellion, which was just thinking, not too many scenes ago in that conversation with Luthen, to now, going, full any means justify the right ends as she is now. So I'm kind of surprised, but it very much, this show, I love this show because a lot of times, there's that saying that history is written by the victors, and that you tend to look at the history that led up to a certain thing, and the people who made it happen are kind of considered to be heroes, and they're considered, and the things that they did that were very heroic and very moral, are always highlighted, and the things that they did that were kind of more gray and morally suspect, those things are kind of diminished because, again, it's their descendants and the people that benefited from what they did writing the stories. And so what you kind of lose in this is that there's kind of always two sides. Usually one is, more good than the other. But humanity and people are complicated, and people will do things on both sides that are right and wrong. And I think what this season has highlighted, and what this finale really highlighted, was that, in a lot of instances, it really just comes down to the end goal and the morality of that, rather than the actual fighting. And then I think, I guess, finally, what we saw Mon Mothma do really explains why Jyn has to shake Cassian out of that in Rogue One, because Cassian's in that full mode in Rogue One where he's going to do any tactic to be successful. I mean, he's setting up to assassinate her father and do all types of stuff. And, she tells him like, oh, how are you better? How are you better than the other side if you're going to be doing these things?
Oh, one of the best lines in all of Star Wars.
Amazing. So
orders when you know they're wrong, you might as well be a stormtrooper. So good.
So this kind of brings up a really interesting question now that we've seen what Luthen's done. Like, for instance, like knowing that he could have saved
Krieger.
Krieger. Yes, thank you.
Knowing
he could have saved Krieger.
Ego.
He could have warned Krieger, and Saw, because Saw found out about it, could have warned him. Both of them made the decision that instead of, taking a step back to take two steps forward and pulling their mole out of the ISB, because they could have just sent him packing into like a witness protection program. They could have sent his family somewhere, but they would rather have that mole than the lives of all those people. So yeah, it's just really interesting how they're painting it as, in a war, in a rebellion, in a fight like this, history is written by the victors, and there are just things that are questionable happening on all sides, and it just kind of comes down to the end of the day and who survives and lives to tell about it. And I guess really it just comes down to like, where are the lines now? Like, where are they going to draw the lines? How far is too far for the rebels to go? Obviously Jyn had a line. Now it's interesting to see where that is for these other characters, because we don't know right now. It just keeps getting pushed.
Yeah, it's very much as a ends justify the means kind of way of looking at it. That's what Luthen certainly has, and it's what Mon Mothma is adopting. And next season will be fascinating to see how her relationship with Lita and divorcee divorce face, whatever his name, Perrin. You know, whatever her relationship winds up being with the two of them going forward, you know, it's certainly never going to be the same after all this. That's another one that I feel like would have been a real slow burn in season 2, had it if this were 3 seasons or 4 or 5. Hannah, what are your thoughts on how Mon Mothma's storyline wrapped up in season 1?
Yeah, really, really positively of her character and her journey, and I think it's very complex in the right ways. But it's hard. I sound like I criticize it, but I criticize it because I wanted it more. But it's hard to say that in a show that isn't about her, and it is a Cassian Andor story. But I do feel as though I'm wanting more of her story, and I felt like we could have gotten a bit more meat on the bone with her journey, because if we think about even episode, when did she first come in? Episode 3 or 4. She was having money problems, and that was pretty much the only kind of note that we hit. Like every time we saw her, it's like she's still having money problems. Not that it was meant to be solved instantly, but it's just like every time it's like money problems. And then it wasn't really until the final scene of this finale where it's like, okay, she's made this admittedly horrific and like really drastic decision. And, like what you were saying, Chris, is like, it shows the gravity of the situation and the gravity of like, she's made this like immoral to her decision because she, understands that the weight of the galaxy and if she can succeed is on her shoulders. But I just wish there was a little bit more, like what I said, meat in the bone of her story. I think maybe this is coming from, I'm saying this from, I'm still kind of salty that we didn't get a dinner party scene. I know we got some cocktail drink scenes, but I wish we got that like a real like sit down dinner party scene where like really like clearly this show has shown us that the writers behind it are good at writing dialogue and are good at writing character versus character conversations, and I feel like that could have been a fantastic opportunity to see some interesting dialogue happen. But in this finale, I think we didn't have to get too much dialogue of her to understand her decision. I think that was very good storytelling there, where it's just, we see her and Perrin and was it Leda? I always forget her name. Leda, walking towards Davo and his son. I think that said a lot. It showed her decision, but I felt like we could have maybe got a bit more build up of her story here, because I think really it's a really fascinating one of her journey to the rebellion.
Yeah. Go ahead, Chris. Go ahead.
I guess I would say it's like on one hand, yes, like it could have been its own show, but on the other hand, I do feel like they gave a lot to it for it being the B plot of the show. Like, it's like it's almost like a C plot, because it's like the Luthen stuff is almost like the B plot, and then that's like the C plot. So sure. I feel like, and in a lot of ways, what's going on with the ISB is like another plot. So there's so many plots going on that like I feel like that they gave it more time than most shows would. I think that a lot of the scenes involving Mothma were very domestic and very kind of low key. And they did a lot to really show you what her family life was and kind of what her day-to-day life was and what her kind of motivations were. And like, I feel like there was a lot more than they could, like, they didn't need to do that. Like, I don't feel like they needed to give as much time as they did to a lot of that smaller stuff. I think what you didn't see is a lot of like big, huge consequential stuff. Like you didn't see, there was a few tense conversations, but most of the scenes with Mothma were more just kind of setting the scene type scenes. They weren't, big, huge moments in her life. So I'll give it to them for doing that. I think that was done well. And of course, there's way more to that. Like there could have been a show all about just her, and there could have been more of those big moments instead of just, seeing a glimpse of her in the car ride home from something. I think for a show that's about Andor and about Luthen and about the ISB and the inner workings of the ISB, I think that they gave more than a fair amount of time to that plot.
It's interesting to me that this is the one plot in the show that didn't really revolve around Andor.
Yeah.
All of the other ones, even Luthen's actions, they all sort of tied back. There was all a link back to Cassian, except Mon Mothma's storyline. That one was the one that always felt like it was separate. It almost felt like a different show that interacted with Andor, with all the other plot lines, with a lot of the other plot lines. We did have Vel come into that story, and obviously Luthen is a big player in that. But it did feel sort of separate on its own. And you have to think that somewhere down the line, the plan is for those characters to meet and for those characters to work together and for that to be a big moment on the show. But for the time, but for what we saw in season 1, it was a little bit, it felt like it was the other storyline.
It
where
reminds
everything
me
else was moving in one direction. It was kind of going off just a little bit on its own.
Well, it reminds me of how Game of Thrones is written and how like the whole plot and everything going on with Daenerys is completely disconnected from everything else for most of the show. And yet you always assume like, okay, these things are going to tie together because there's that talk of reclaiming the Iron Throne, and you expect that they're setting up for what ended up being the last season where everything did connect. And so I think that that's probably how we would have felt about this if not for the fact that we know who Mon Mothma is already. Like most of the people watching this show know her from Rogue One, know her from the Star Wars films, and know that she's a huge part of the rebellion. So having an origin story for her makes sense, as it would if, there was a lot of scenes with Bail Organa, for example. And that's why, it all makes sense in Kenobi when he's in so much of it, because we know how much of a role he plays in things. Yeah, it would be really interesting if they had chosen to do this with a new character, because all the new characters do tie in. Like you see how the Luthen stuff ties in, from the very beginning, because, one of his first scenes, he's with Cassian. And then you see how the stuff with Deidra ties in. She keeps evolving herself. So a lot of the things that they've shown that are separate did connect in with the new characters. But I think they were able to do this because we already kind of know who she is and we know that she's important. We're already on the edge of our seats. We don't need to be made to have interest in this. It seems like anything she could do would be interesting just because we know where it's going. So it would be interesting to see how people would have reacted to this if she was just another senator and not, the Mon Mothma like that. It would be interesting to see if it would have been received so well to have it be disconnected through this point, through the end of the season. But again, sorry, I'll finish by saying that again, the realism of this, like somebody has to be funding things, like somebody has to be like the political societal power behind a revolution. Someone has to be, and I think, they didn't explain things super well in the Star Wars prequels with the rise of the Empire, where that came from. And that's why I really hope that the Acolyte or something brings back the Darth Plagueis storyline into Star Wars current canon, because the James Luceno Darth Plagueis book explained the kind of mundane side of where the Empire came from. Like it explained that Plagueis was a very wealthy businessman, Hugo Damask, and had set up the trade or set up the CIS and ran a lot of the finances going on in the economy of the Republic. And so it makes a lot of sense. Palpatine isn't just powerful because, he happens to have the dark side of the Force and happens to ascend to the role of a chancellor of the Republic. He's also powerful because he has all of these moneyed interests and wealth behind him in the empire, in the business empire that Hugo Damas set up, that he took over after he killed him. So I think they're setting Mon Mothma up to be kind of like the opposite side of that. Like, she's also from money. She also has this empire, but she now has to utilize it while maintaining a double life, not being undercover. Now that Palpatine is out, you know, he's no longer needs to be undercover. She still does, because she's operating in the Senate and using that cover to protect herself, and that's her way of protecting herself. But like, you know, this whole season for her is basically about her figuring out, okay, how do I exercise that same financial power, that same social power that Hugo Damas was able to exercise, that led up to the conflict that created the empire, in a way that protects her and allows her to keep operating under the empire. Like, it's very brilliantly done. And I thought it was it adds a lot of realism and nuance to something that Star Wars tends to not always have time to get into in films and even TV shows, that really you have to end up reading a book to kind of like get that level of detail to what's going on. But it makes sense, because you have to assume that that's there. It's just seldom talked about and shown.
Yeah. I mean, up until this show, Star Wars largely has treated its stories as fairy tales. You know, there's
yeah,
you know, that's perhaps a bit of an exaggeration, a bit of a sweeping statement, but by and large, it's good versus evil. How does good become evil? And exploring a little bit of the graying of the lines between good and evil. This is the first show that's like, let's set aside the epic grand scale, and let's deal with the nitty gritty, the people that are actually living in this, and the people that are making the moves that allow the epic grand scale stuff to happen down the line. With Andor, you know, what we've seen through season 1 is that there's a lot of spirit out there in the galaxy. There's a lot of people that want to fight against the Empire, and there are people that are willing to stand up. That's what each of the arcs that we saw showed in different ways. You saw a little bit of sort of resistance in the first episode, in the first 3 episodes, with the citizens on Ferrix, you know, kind of a precursor to what we see in the finale with, you know, the banging of all the the metal things, and so that they would fight against the Rent-A-Cops and Syril Karn. And then in the next episode, you see the more dedicated and extreme rebels with Vel and Nemec and Skeen and everybody. And then with the prisoners arc, you know, you see what it takes for people to realize that they have to stand up and fight back. And so all through that, we're seeing that people want to fight back against the Empire, and that under the right circumstances, they will fight back against the Empire. But what the Empire has is the advantage when it comes to resources. And so if it's going to be a remotely fair fight, which even in the end, it isn't really, you know, the rebels have to be funded from somewhere. And that's where the Mon Mothma storyline comes in. And so, you know, somewhere down the line, you know, this isn't any sort of grand insight. It's, you know, I think everybody knows that at some point down the line, the Cassian and the Mon Mothma storylines are going to come together, but because you have to bring together the spirit with the resources if you want to actually do something, which is where we find them at the beginning of Rogue One, is finally with some resources, and they just need a little extra spirit, which Jyn, Cassian, and the Rogue One crew kick in.
Yeah, I mean, they have that whole fleet. You know, Radis has that whole fleet by Rogue One. You know, that didn't come from a junkyard. Like, somebody had to buy all those ships. That's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And, you know, one of Nemec's whole things is that, you know, there's all these pockets of rebellion that are out there now. And eventually they will, you know, they'll come together. And what we see in Rogue One is them coming together.
And I think I said this about halfway through the season on one of the episodes, is this idea that the biggest enemy to the rebellion or to the galaxy isn't actually the Empire, but the biggest enemy is I'm forgetting the word, but indecision, lack of
Complacency.
complacency. Thank you so much. Yes, being complacent is the biggest villain. And I think this is so evident in this episode because as much as the Empire is the evil presence and the villain and the things that are wrong and they're doing wrong things, that is so easily combated. We can see in this show, this town full of just, workers, scrap workers that are just normal, everyday people. They were able to, they might not have, won so and so's, quote unquote. But they were able to combat them and they were able to kind of make their mark and make a stand. But if they just lived in complacency, they would have constantly be losing and they would constantly be under that pressure and under that the rule of the Empire. So I really like this idea of that. Yeah, complacency is the enemy. That you can really overcome the Empire if you just commit to it. And I think that's also something of Cassian's journey that I really enjoy. That at the start he was complacent and he didn't really care. Oh yeah, Empire's over here, whatever. I'm doing my own thing. And then little by little he understands how much of a hold the Empire has, but then really he learns how much power he has, how much influence he has. If he just stands up and say, no, I'm not taking this, he can actually make a change and make effect in the galaxy. And I love that. I love that concept through this whole show, actually.
It's Marva's her sort of final message to everybody, right? She talks about how it got to this point where people were just sort of happy to just go about living their lives, doing things for the Empire as long as they were left alone, as long as they thought they could keep living, as long as they had each other, as she said. And eventually, but that's not enough for the Empire. The Empire isn't just going to let you do your own thing. They want power. The Emperor craves power and is going to take it wherever he can. He's not going to let anybody maintain any little bit of power. And Marva's point to everybody is they should have fought back immediately. They should have pushed back immediately, but they couldn't. They didn't. So now they have to fight. They have to fight now. And it's like that saying, the best time to plant a tree was 30 years ago. The second best time is now. And it's basically, the best time to fight the Empire was maybe 15 years ago. Second best time is now. Yep. So let's get out there and let's fight back. And that little bit of inspiration from her and that jackass of an Imperial kicking over B2, never forgive that guy, was enough to inspire this riot led by Brasso, legend that he is. I love that one point where he just has like a droid arm and starts beating the stormtrooper.
Yeah,
right? I was like, let's go, Brasso. I love it. And how successful, how impactful was this little uprising on Ferrix? Who knows? We don't know really from the episode. I think we can probably suspect it wasn't all that successful. You can probably bet that the Empire will, clamp down even harder on Ferrix. But, every little bit counts. And that's one of the things that Nemec says is, he has, what's the line here? I'm looking at, I wrote it all out because it's so beautiful. I missed Nemec. I missed my manifesto boy. I was glad to have him back for an episode. He says this: remember, freedom is a pure idea. It occurs spontaneously and without instruction. Random acts of insurrections are occurring constantly throughout the galaxy. There are whole armies, battalions that have no idea they're already enlisted in the cause. Remember, the frontier of rebellion is everywhere, and even the smallest act of insurrection pushes our lines forward. And there's a really interesting shot towards the end of the insurrection, and this will kind of move us to another character, and that's of Luthen. Luthen is fairly passive in this episode. He doesn't do a lot. He's just kind of there watching. in the end. You know, he's trying to take action. He's trying to kill Cassian, but you know, events conspire to stop him from doing that. But he's watching the what's left of, you know, sort of the fallout of this mini act of rebellion. And he's got this really fascinating look on his face. And it made me think, you know, Luthen is a guy who is organizing all of this. He's sending other people off to go fight these missions. He's funding things. He's securing lines of funding. He's coordinating rebel assaults. But how much time has he actually spent on the front lines during a fight?
That's a good point.
And what does he make of what he just witnessed? Does it give him hope that there are good people out there that are going to stand up and fight back? Or does it make him realize just how desperate the situation is? Because, yes, those were a lot of good people, a lot of brave people on Ferrix that day. And a lot of them died. You know, a handful escaped on that ship. A lot died, and the rest are going to have the boot of the Empire even more firmly on their throat going forward. And so I think it's an interesting moment for Luthen to actually witness this. And for as much as he knows intellectually in that Shakespearean speech he gave a couple of weeks ago, to actually see it and so viscerally and to be there on the ground witnessing it, it's pretty harrowing. And I'm curious, what did you guys make of Luthen's involvement or lack thereof in this episode?
I think this situation is kind of small for him.
Sure.
Like I think the fact that, you know, he was fine having Krieger walk into a trap kind of suggested that, you know, he's thinking extremely big picture. And I think that, you know, a riot is not big picture for him. So, I mean, I don't think it would come as to any surprise to him that this would happen. Like, he knows that, you know, people don't like the Empire clearly because they're willing to help him. So they agree with him on that. But I think for him, his focus was very much on Cassian. Like, he was there to make sure that the job got done and Cassian got killed. Like, that was what he was there to do. And also to make sure that Cassian didn't fall into the hands of the Empire beyond that. So I think, you know, really what it comes down to, and we kind of already know the answer to this probably, is, you know, how he's going to react to Cassian offering to join the rebellion now. And we would assume that he's going to say yes. We would assume it's not going to be a situation where they fight each other and Cassian kills him and that's it with Luthen. Like, I don't think that's going to happen. It doesn't make sense that it would, based on how things have been written so far. But yeah, I think it was very Cassian centric, everything that Luthen was doing. And it was kind of, that's why he wasn't involved in that fight, because his story doesn't have anything to do with that fight or the people there.
Hannah, what do you think?
Yeah, I think his involvement was like kind of what you were saying before, Dom. It was so, his presence was quite large, but it was quite interesting how he had no involvement and he was quite passive this whole thing. But I definitely think he has had it, like, this event has made an impact on him. Whether small or large, I think it has made some impact on him. And I think that's what I got from when Cassian snuck on the ship at the end of the episode. And, you know, Cassian says, "Kill me or take me in." And I think Luthen's smile there, and he does this little smirk smile, you know, he does this little thing. I think that was him. I read that as him realizing that he obviously underestimated Cassian, and realizing that he can the rebellion might be a bit conceptual to him up until this point. You know, we've had him say that amazing speech a couple episodes ago and all that kind of stuff. But I think, yeah, it's been a bit conceptual to him. You know, even with the older Aldani stuff, even though he's super invested and involved and he orchestrated it, really, he's not there on the front line. He's not seeing it happen. And I think he really, in this event on Ferrix, he really see what it meant to be fighting for the rebellion. And I think season 2 Luthen, hopefully we'll get more of him, a lot more of him. And I think season 2 Luthen will be a lot more hands-on. And I think that's maybe he's a bit of a turner character here. He's gonna get a bit more hands-on with rebellion.
Yeah. One of the things Luthen said to Lonnie, is he says, "I need heroes, Lonnie, or I need all the heroes I can get." And I think he saw a lot of heroes on Ferrix, a lot of people who were ready to stand up and fight back. And so it's small potatoes, but as I said, I think he can walk away from that with a reason for great hope, as well as a reason for great pessimism about their chances in the wars to come against the Empire. Let's talk about Cassian and his arc, because this is the finale of season 1 of the Cassian Andor show, or the untitled Cassian Andor prequel, as it was known for so many years before they settled on the just tremendously creative title Andor. We see him as you just said, Hannah. We see him at the end finally signing up for the rebellion, and we see him through this episode basically risking everything to save Bix, and I think there's possibly an element of he couldn't save Marva, so he's definitely going to save Bix. What did we think of how his storyline was played out over this episode, and how it brought to a conclusion his arc for season 1 and sets him on the path for Rogue One? And I'll throw all of those questions to you. Feel free to answer all or none.
Give it to Chris. I'm still calculating that response.
There's a math. You're like at your calculator.
Yeah, I'm just like, oh, yeah.
So much. Chris, take it away.
Yeah,
talk about Cassian.
Cassian feels kind of forced into the rebellion still. Like, I'm not 100% convinced that he's completely doing this.
Yes.
Not being coerced, because he's in a situation where, like, he realizes that he's kind of a marked man now because of his involvement in Aldhani, and because he knows that Luthen wants to kill him, which is interesting. I'm kind of curious how he figured that out without just kind of deducing things. So yeah, I think he makes that decision because he knows now he's going to be running for the rest of his life from both the Empire and the Rebellion. Because the Empire is after him because he's a fugitive, and the Rebellion's after him because he knows too much. And so there's really no way to win now. There's no way to hide in this coming conflict. So, I mean, I think we can always give him some pure motivations, but I don't know. I think he's a bit of a gray character. I think that he always is a character that has kind of mixed motivations, and that there's always some selfishness in what he's doing.
Interesting. Hannah, have you formulated?
Yes, yeah. I needed that. I needed that to just be like, okay, yeah, I think I know what I'm thinking. Like, I think, okay, Cassian. Like, Cassian's journey through this whole season has been very fascinating to me. And again, I don't want to harp on my criticisms of the show, but one of my criticism is that we don't get enough Cassian, which is odd because I was just complaining about how we don't get enough Mon Mothma. But I want a bit more of him, because I think his journey here is so fascinating. And I think there's a lot of what I was saying previously about his complacency that is very fascinating to me, because I think, kind of relating it to real world, like at earthly world, I think that's a very common trope of how low-key people can be, whether it, within their day-to-day life. And I think Cassian is a great embodiment of that. But I think his journey in this season has been really good, but I wish we got more of it. Because, the Cassian we see in this finale is so calculated and talented. He knows what he's doing. He's working so well on his feet, and he's so just switched on, where at the start of the season he kind of just falls into every situation he is in. Like, I love how he really did somehow stumble into like this intense heist of only 5 people, top secret mission. He just somehow like ended up there. But by the end of the season, he's this really calculated character. What was your initial question? What's the initial question?
I don't remember.
I don't
anymore.
remember either.
Yeah,
we're just talking about
Cassian.
Cassian.
His development, I think, was very, very well done in this season. I think, honestly, I was iffy by like the prison sequences. I was like, we're getting to the end of the season. Like, how much growth have we done? And it really hasn't been until the finale that I've really realized, oh wow, Cassian has come on quite a journey and quite a transformation since the premiere, since episode 1.
You can kind of compare Cassian to Luke a lot, because Luke does not want to join the rebellion until he finds out that his aunt and uncle died. And I'm thinking that really the point of this episode was to show that really the last thing in the world that Cassian cared about was Marva. She didn't want to run away with him, and now she's dead. So he doesn't really, have anything to lose at this point. And I think that's one of the reasons why he's able to make that decision that he did, because, his circumstances have changed for him, and they're different than they were at the beginning of the season and through most of the season. So I think really, really what the point was to show, like, things have to change. Circumstances have to change in order for characters to change, and circumstances changed. So now he's changed.
Yeah. Yeah. Cassian at the beginning of the story, I think, would have been very happy to remain just sort of this aloof thief going around, living his life, not really doing all that much. Just, trying to, make a little money here, get some intel about his sister there, which there's plot line for season 2 right there. He's not really invested in taking down the Empire. The Empire's just become part of his life the same way it has for everybody else on Ferrix, which is what Marva is talking about in her hologram. Then a situation happens where he's forced out. He's forced to leave. He creates that when he murders those 2 security guards. And the only lifeline that he's offered is Luthen. So he gets caught up in the Aldani raid. He starts to see, that there is this fight. There are people out there who are trying to fight back. And then but he's still not invested in that actual side of it. He's not Nemec. He's not going to write a manifesto. He's not even going to read Nemec's manifesto just yet. Then he goes to prison, and he helps incite a mass breakout and a one of those small acts of rebellion that Nemec talks about in his book. And I think it's very telling that after he's out of prison, we see him reading or listening to Nemec's manifesto. He's starting to become invested in the cause. And then when he loses Marva, he blames himself for that. He wanted to be there with her at the very least. He didn't want her to die alone and away from him. And there's a beautiful moment in the sewers in this episode.
What a weird
yeah, right. But Brasso, again, being the unsung MVP of this season, he gets to deliver Marva's sort of final words to Cassian. He says, "Tell him none of this is his fault. None of this is his fault. It was already burning. He is just the spark of the fire. Tell him he knows everything he needs to know and feels everything he needs to feel. And when the day comes that those 2 pull together, he will be an unstoppable force for good." And as I heard those lines, could see scenes from Rogue One playing out in my head. So that's exactly where he winds up. And so I think this journey that we've seen him go on, that is sort of the final push he needed to actually be ready to join up with Luthen and risk it all for something real. Is there still an element of self-preservation? Possibly, sure. Yeah. Cassian makes some choices in Rogue One that are questionable or dubious. But I do think at this moment, his motivations are in the right place. We've seen him go on the journey to where he's ready to become a rebel, become a proper rebel at the end of this season. And I think we'll see over the course of season 2 him learn what that actually means. Because I think we need to look at Rogue One as the third act of this story. This is Act 1. Next season is Act 2, and we've already seen Act 3. And so we have to see, we see Cassian in a place where he's ready to risk it all. He's ready to join up in this for this cause. But he still hasn't quite done what Marva says he needs to do. He hasn't quite put together him knowing everything he needs to know and feels everything he needs to feel. And that moment doesn't come until Rogue One, when he chooses not to kill Galen Erso. And then chooses to disobey the larger rebellion. Everything Marva tells him he's going to do, he does in Rogue One. He does at the end of his story. Now we just have to see him get to the place where, even though he's committed to the rebellion, he's kind of forgot what he's actually fighting for. Because it's not until Rogue One that he remembers. Where do we want to go next? Where do we want? I guess we haven't touched on Syril and Deidra.
That's surprising.
Yeah. Let's go Deidra first, then we'll get to Syril and their ultimate meetings. We see Deidra marching around on Ferrix, getting really invested in the search for Cassian. But we also see her calling back home. She makes a quick Zoom call back to Patergast or whatever his name is, about the Anto Krieger mission and how she feels about that. Hannah, I'll throw it to you this time. Hopefully
I've got calculations for this answer now.
Good. All right. What'd you think of Deidra Miro's role in episode 12?
Yeah, I love her presence, and I've loved her presence all season long, and it's just continued to grow. I think it's taken an interesting turn of I enjoyed seeing her so shaken up and desperate by the end of the episode. Obviously she kind of got accidentally caught up in the kind of fight chaos of what the action piece was, which was really fascinating to see. And I really love her character. I hope she lives on for season 2, and maybe, she dies in the finale of season 2, hence her, presence not being in Rogue One. But I really enjoyed her type of character, and I think they've really nailed her presence in this show. And the whole Syril Deidra thing, I'm not sure if I'm on board yet. It's just I haven't really put too much thought into it. I do have to say, while that scene was happening where they're kind of caught up in this weird closet thing, I did audibly say, "Don't do it. Don't do it." I did audibly say that. Just going, man. I don't know why, but it's just like, please.
I didn't say it out loud, but I was thinking the same thing. I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, you better not. This can't possibly be where this is going.
I don't know. Like, I'm maybe, if they flesh it out and it's got more context to it, maybe further down the line there's going to be a Syril Deidra relationship, but I don't know. Just right in that moment, I was like, not now. Not now. Action pieces and random kisses in the middle of it never goes well in Star Wars. It never goes down well in Star Wars. So yeah.
Yeah, all that's missing from that scene is Deidre looking at Syril going, I've been dying a little bit every day since you gave me that kiss. Or since you accosted me outside my workplace.
Oh man.
Oh jeez.
And
Shocking.
Syril will just be like, I don't like sand. And Deidre will be like, what does that have anything to do with this?
Oh.
Love it. Love it. Yeah. I'll be honest. I don't think that we're gonna get a Syril Deidre relationship. No. I think we will see a highly uncomfortable business partnership.
Yeah.
But I don't think those two will be making out in the broom closets at the ISB headquarters anytime soon. Chris, what did you think of Deidre's storyline in this?
I thought it was really interesting. Her conversation back to the ISB and Powdergas, because like they still don't understand the scale of this thing. Like despite them, giving her the time of day and actually listening to her and giving her the resources that she needs to go after Cassian, like they feel like killing Krieger is enough to counteract Aldhani, which I think is really, really interesting. That they continue to have that level of pride that Cassian was talking about, in the first arc of the season, like that they can think that, okay, well, they just stole a bunch of money from us. Well, we just killed a bunch of them, so we're good. We're even. That's not going to happen. No one's going to want to do that again. They learned their lesson. We're good. Like, it's really surprising to me that they would have that level of arrogance. And it makes sense. And it's funny because it's like during a lot of the Clone Wars era, you kept coming across these characters that kind of had a feeling something was going on. Like had a feeling that somebody was pulling the strings behind both sides, and that there is another Sith Lord out there that had been not uncovered yet. And, all those people were brushed aside by the Jedi Order. And if the Jedi Order had listened to them and put all of their efforts behind not going after Dooku, but going after Sidious and Palpatine, and figuring out that Sidious was Palpatine, then, perhaps the Empire itself could have been avoided. So Deidre is interesting because she's like the opposite of that. Like she's the voice inside the Empire who is accurate, who actually knows what's going on. And she's the one that's being brushed aside. And just like with what happened to the Jedi Order, because of people not listening to her, the Empire will eventually fall. So I think it's really interesting that we're seeing this story for once from the other side, because we've never had that before. We've only seen it with the heroes being the ones that actually know the truth. Now it's a villainous character who is the only one who knows the truth, yet still is not getting the full support that she needs. I think that's very interesting.
It's what I found really interesting about that is Powdergas says, the revenge for Aldhani is done basically to placate Palpatine.
Yeah.
That, this is an act of revenge for Palpatine, which on the one hand, for a Sith getting revenge makes sense. You might even call some of the things they do the revenge of the Sith. But at the same time, Palpatine is supposed to be smarter than that. At least he is during the prequel era. During the prequel era, he's able to think 3 steps ahead. Whereas I think during the original trilogy era, and I think we're firmly entering the OT era in this show, he's a little bit, Luke says to him, your overconfidence is your weakness.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Palpatine thinks there's no way any sort of rebellion like this could happen. And the best way to prevent it is to just send a message, get some revenge for what happened on Aldhani. And he cannot imagine that someone in the ISB would be working against him and would pass that information along to the rebellion. And he can't imagine that the rebellion would be led by someone like Luthen, who's willing to let those people die. Because think about what does the Grand Inquisitor say about the Jedi in Obi-Wan Kenobi? It's something to the effect of, their compassion is their weakness. Jedi can't help themselves. When they see injustice,
It's
they
an
have to act.
itch.
Exactly.
They cannot scratch.
Exactly. He thinks the people he's fighting are all the Jedi, are people like the Jedi who, when they see something's wrong, they can't ignore it. They're not willing to sacrifice 30 people plus Krieger to protect one source.
Interesting.
But Luthen is.
Mm-hmm.
And so Luthen's the kind of adversary that Palpatine is not thinking about. And a really interesting scene, and who knows if they'll do this, but a really interesting scene would be a conversation between Deidra Miro and Emperor Sheev Palpatine. Because she would probably try and tell him that there's this network out there, that there's this rebellion out there. But it's not until they blow up the Death Star that anybody takes them seriously. They think we're building this ultimate weapon, and even if they're a little bit of a threat, what is a threat to your Starfleet commander, not to this battle station? Is that Mahdi who says that? In New Hope, that's sort of the thinking out there. So the rebellion may be a nuisance, but they're not a real threat. But when you have someone like Luthen behind it, could be a real threat.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting about Palpatine is, like we talked a bit ago about how Star Wars very much came out of fairy tales, and that this is the most kind of detailed, realistic look at Star Wars in the Andor show. And Palpatine very much has some fairy tale type concepts, like this idea that the only one that really matters is Luke Skywalker. Like, he doesn't really care about what's going on elsewhere. He feels like, all right, my resources can get rid of their resources, but they've got this one guy, and I need to make sure that I take care of him. And so, everything in the original trilogy, once he finds out about Luke Skywalker, is orchestrated around Luke Skywalker. And Palpatine doesn't really seem to care at all about the rest of the rebellion. He'll win some battles, he'll lose some battles. He just knows his real threat is Luke Skywalker. And so I think that's what's going on there. So at this point, he's not going to care, because he's like, okay, so what? There's an organized rebellion. Like, if he knows that they're building this thing and they're several years away from its completion, where all they have to do is blow up Alderaan, and then boom, everybody's going to be too afraid to rebel. But just after they do that, it gets blown up and people have hope, a new hope. And so, but of course, Palpatine's just like, all right, I'll just build another one. I'll make a bigger one. I can do that again. And this time it's not going to have a hole in it. Yeah, there was a hole in the first one because of Galen Erso. I wonder if he ever found out how that happened. I think that would be an interesting scene. Did Palpatine ever actually know that it was Galen Erso who created the backdoor flaw in the Death Star? I'm curious about that.
He would have gone all Kylo Ren, and he would have got his lightsaber and smashed his desk.
But he's like, but he must have realized,
or just berated Darth Vader over the phone like he does on Robot Chicken.
Yeah. But he must have realized that, it would be much more difficult to destroy a second one. Somehow they still did. So, he had Snoke make Starkiller Base, and then he had Exegol made, and it just keeps going on and on and on and on and on and on.
He's like, if at first you don't succeed, try again.
Yeah.
Really? No. He was just a really successful builder. He had a, he was a tradesperson, Palpatine, and he just wanted to keep building stuff.
My day job is as Emperor of the Universe, but my passion is architecture. Terrible Palpatine impression.
I want that skit.
But yeah, no, it's true. Palpatine he never sees the rebellion as a real threat. He never sees them as anything that really can or should be he should be concerned about, and that's ultimately what is his downfall. Syril. Let's talk about Syril boy. He doesn't really. I was a little. This is the one place where the episode was a little bit of a disappointment to me. He doesn't really factor into it in a way that I think it felt like we were building up to over the course of the season. Yes, he saves Deidra. Yes, that's an important moment. But for the amount of time we spent with him, and I'm not regretting all of those wonderfully awkward breakfast scenes where he's eating his Cocoa Puffs or whatever. It did feel like this is one place where, he could have been a little bit more. There's a lot of characters who are fairly passive through this storyline. And I felt like I wanted Syril to be a little more active.
Yeah, no, I see that. I do think that a lot of his stuff is built up for season 2, and super extremely mild spoiler, but it was announced today or this week, that the first scene chronologically in filming is going to have him in it.
There you go. I mean, what a shocker. He's back for season 2. A character who survived season 1 is back for season 2.
But he's going to be potentially in maybe the beginning of the season, and then in a big way if they've chosen to film his scenes first.
I suspect him, and we'll see a lot of him and Deidra through all of season 2. It'll, again, given the evolution of how they choose to tell this story, it'll be interesting to see, if certain characters make it all the way to the end of the season, or if they sort of get offed middle of the way through. Like, I can't see Luthen living past episode 6. It sort of feels like, he would probably have died at the end of season 3. So instead, we'll get him sort of at season, about halfway through season 2. But
yes, Syril, I is probably my least favorite part of this show. I enjoy kind of poking fun at him, and I will always have a laugh about this character. But if I'm trying to critique this show, I really didn't connect with him at all. Not in a relatable way, but more in a connect of, I didn't really ever understand his character. I didn't really understand. I theoretically understood his point of wanting to track down Cassian, but I never found it really believable, or I couldn't really invest my time into that character. Be like, oh yeah, this guy, trying to get revenge. I never felt very passionate about his storyline there, and I think that's one of the most disappointing things I'm finding in the finale of. I felt like that was. He was really building all through the season. We kept cutting to these scenes of him doing something and his character doing something, talking to Deidra, trying to get, he's working somewhere else, but he's putting all these complaints in. Like, it was all really building up. And, I don't feel very satisfied with his character at all. And Chris, you might be right that in the fact that, I think we'll get to this, but one of my theories for season 2 is Syril and Deidra teaming up, and they're on the hunt themselves for Cassian, and Cassian and the crew is just going to be on the run the whole time. I think that's how it'll go. So I think, we'll get more of his maybe just journey and his character in season 2. But this season, I just felt very disconnected from Syril. Apart from having a laugh at him, I do not like that character.
I think obviously, you're not supposed to like him, but also, from a quality point of view, I understand that as well. But, I think the purpose of his character is they're showing people's motivations for what side of this conflict they're on from kind of all different angles. And so you see someone like Cassian, who's a criminal who's just trying to survive. And that's really survival is his main motivation. And it's a very kind of selfish survival. And then you see ideologues like Nemec, who, you know, have a very specific vision for what they want the galaxy to look like and want to articulate and share that vision. You have a lot of people who had the Empire do something really terrible to them, and that's why they're rebelling. But on the Empire side, I think they've done a lot to show the motivations of characters there. Like, you know, they've shown that a lot of people within the ISB, I mean, and prior to that in the security forces, they're just people trying to do their job and security. And, you know, it's like, would they really be doing anything different if they were fighting the Separatists? Like, they'd be doing the same thing if it was the Separatists and not the rebels. So they're really not doing their job any differently. They're just motivated to do a good job. I think the point of Syril, and I think Perrin also kind of does this as well, is Syril and Perrin are the two types of people that you're not supposed to like, who are very flawed individuals that show how the Empire can still exist. Because the Empire isn't just raw power. Like, the Empire isn't just, you know, Palpatine has a bunch of stormtroopers and a naval fleet and a security bureau, and he's in charge because he's powerful. He's powerful because the Empire aligns with the ideals and wishes of a lot of people in the galaxy. And I think that Perrin and Syril are two really peak examples of characters that are very flawed, and their flaws are kind of, they are amplified by their roles being so close to what's going on in the conflict. Because Perrin, his flaw is that he just cares about being a socialite and high society and playing the Coruscant game in the oligarchy there. And he doesn't really care. And you have a very specific, you know, line drawn between him and Mothma that shows that Mothma does care about people, and Perrin doesn't care, because he's dining with people who put forth legislation that is resulting in people dying, and she knows about it, and he's fine with that. He'll eat on their behalf as they starve. And so that's an example. He's not a likable character, but I think the point of his character is he's a flawed character, and his flaws are just one of many, many, many problems in society that perpetuate the Empire. And I think Syril's the same thing. Like, Syril is a zealot and an ideologue, but he wants order and he wants personal purpose. He wants to feel like he's doing something that is making a difference, and he wants to maintain law and order. That's the thing that he wants to do. So he saw this guy murder two people, and he's fixated on that. And he's like, I will do everything to bring this guy to justice. And I don't want to just, you know, be, you know, I think what shows that he's not doing it from a morally upright point of view is they go out of their way to show how he wants to flaunt his position. He wants to do it to make people respect him, like him upgrading his uniform.
Yeah.
It's like a good example of that. Like, he not only wants to catch Cassian, but he wants the personal recognition and the respect from doing that. And that is why he's doing that. So he's motivated. He wants law and order, but he's selfishly motivated to do that in a way that brings accolades to himself. And so I think that's kind of what's going on with him. And it's like, it's very unlikable. It's terrible. But again, I think they're showing it for a reason, because they're showing, like, how can the Empire survive? How can it have survived already for over a decade? And how has the rebellion not happened? under their oppression, because there's people in the Empire who support it that are like Perrin because they're at the top of society and just enjoying themselves at the exploitation of others. And there's people like Syril who just want to use the Empire and its mechanisms to get personal accolades and respect, and for their personal vendettas that they fixate on. And I think that what the point of his character is.
Yeah, absolutely. It you know, the Empire State. It I think it falls into a little bit of the, there's the people who are complacent and there's the people who benefit from it, and that's Palpatine's. That's the sweet spot for Palpatine, is to get enough people to fit into one of those two columns that they don't feel the need to ever push back the way the citizens of Ferrix did in this episode, or Lothal, or any of the other planets and systems that we see through other Star Wars storytelling, the original trilogy, on and on like that. Was hoping old Linus Mosk would get a little something more to do. The most Scottish character in Star Wars. Was hoping he'd get another moment in the sun. But alas, it was not meant to be. We've touched on, I think, just about all the characters except Sinta and Vel. We get a couple of moments between the two of them in this episode. Hannah, do you want to take these two?
Yes, because this is another point where I feel a little unsatisfied. I think it's this thing. It's like, oh, it's all gonna make sense in season 2, but I understand that sentiment of, it's like, okay, we're gonna extend this story, but it's like, it feels so unfinished to be, oh yeah, this is the season 1 story. It feels totally unfinished, this Vel Sinta story. The interaction and dynamic is so interesting in this episode, where we see Sinta to be very focused on the rebellion, and she's focused on her work and what the duty at hand that she is accepting and pursuing. And I find that a fascinating concept, and how Vel, I think she's just as for the rebellion, but obviously wants some quality time or some connection with Sinta. It's weird. I like this concept, and I like this kind of character dynamic and this notion that they're going with, but I found that so odd to introduce this in the finale episode. Like, I felt like this is the kind of scenes we would see in maybe episode 10 or 10 or 11, and then in the finale we would see them like team up together to do something for the rebellion, and then have a very like a lovely moment together after, or something like that. And like it's just have a bit more conclusion to it, but not, you don't have to fully cut it off, and then you can continue to extend that, how that looks in season 2. But I just found it so odd, this scene. I found very displaced for my taste of this for a finale episode of a season.
Yeah, I will agree. I think, again, for a lot of the characters, all the last couple of weeks have been, everything's been descending on Ferrix. All of the characters have been showing up there, and I thought that they would all factor into the action there in more ways than they did. In the end, it almost feels like what happened on Ferrix would have happened regardless of if Cassian had been there.
Oh, definitely.
If Luthen had been there, if Sinta had been there, if Vel had been there, if Deidra and Syril had been there, if Mosk had been there, just because I'm going to throw him in there as if he's a main character. Like it all feels like it just would have happened anyways. And it feels like a lot of the characters are very passive in this finale. Brasso feels like the most active character.
Right?
Cassian second, because he is, trying to rescue Bix the whole time. But everybody else is just kind of there watching and making small additions. Sinta stabs that Imperial dude who's been undercover the whole time, and as we talked about, Syril does save Deidra, but otherwise the characters are just kind of watching this play out. And I don't know if that's necessarily that doesn't have to be a bad thing, that doesn't have to be a criticism, but the way the episode ends on that kind of sort of not really cliffhanger, and you don't get to see the fallout from this until a year and a half or 2 years from now, it does feel a little bit like a lot of these storylines were just kind of left hanging. And yeah, you need to leave stuff hanging for season 2. Absolutely. But you do want season 1 to end on a little bit more of a satisfactory note. And Sinta and Vel, they had scenes together, and they were very reminiscent of their last scenes together on Ferrix, before Vel went back to Coruscant. And then, I thought it was really interesting that, Vel goes back to Coruscant. She starts saying the things that Sinta was saying to her. She starts saying them to Mon Mothma. Like, okay, that's cool. That's interesting. A bit of character growth. She's learning from this other character. Okay, good. Like it. And then as soon as she gets back to Ferrix, they basically fall into how things were before. And even though she's not saying it, and she's saying that she's on the same page as Sinta, you can tell she's not loving it. She's not loving the way things are playing out. And yeah, there's a moment, it does feel like there's a moment missing, whether it's a nice moment between the two of them or a breakup. Honestly, it feels like that storyline is just missing the button on it, as I did for Syril and Deidra as well, I think.
Yeah, a lot is still being developed for season 2. It feels like, which makes sense.
Yeah.
So I understand why they would do that. Is they have to continue moving characters in a certain direction and providing information.
But I do think when you get to the end of the season, you do need to not necessarily tie things up, but to place a marker in some of these things.
But that almost was what makes it not realistic, though, because that doesn't happen in real life.
No,
like in real life, you can't expect every person to have this major life-altering moment all at the same time. And that's what stories do. Stories tend to only highlight the storylines that have those moments, and then the other ones just aren't on screen. But what this show does is it has that realism where it still shows things happening, even if it's not big.
Yeah, I don't know. Still feels like something.
Because
go ahead.
I think of it's a pretty incomparable thing. I think these two shows are completely different in every way. But if I think of Mandalorian season 1 finale, it's like, there's still questions of who Cara Dune's background is. We kind of get this, she's a part of the rebellion or something, or New Republic, and not rebellion, New Republic. And we get these characters come together, and there's still questions. There's still questions of where's he going? What's this happening? What are they going to do here? There's still the questions, but there's the wrap up. You understand at the point of the story where everyone's at. But it's like I don't feel that for this finale. I have more confusion than inquiring questions, because I kind of like that sensation at the end of a season. Being like, wow, is this guy gonna become the mayor of the world, or what's gonna happen? I don't know.
The mayor of the world.
I don't know what show I'm thinking of, but
sounds like a great concept for a Disney Plus series.
Oh, jeez. But this left me kind of in the negative questions, being like, well, what happened to that thing that I mentioned? What happened to this idea? We didn't get any of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. I ultimately I think it just felt like too many characters were passive. And you can have some characters be passive. I'm not saying that every character has to have a big moment in every episode or even in the finale. But it did just feel like everybody went to Ferrix and just sort of watched something. And again, that would have been fine if we could have gotten a little bit more reflection on it, which may well come in season 2. But given that there's going to be a long wait for it, and this is where we get into the artificial nature of storytelling, and especially of TV storytelling. I feel like if you're going to, when you hit that point where you're going to ask the audience to wait, you have to really give them a sense that yes, this chapter is over, but there's more to come. And I don't know if they did that successfully in all of the storylines. They did it successfully in some of them. Absolutely. But there was enough in this episode where I just kind of felt like, oh, I don't know if this was, I feel like there could have been more. I guess that's what I'm getting at. I feel like there could have been a little bit more happening in this episode to leave us in a more interesting place to then wait for that second season, 1.5 years or 2 years from now. All right. I will say, I do want to just sort of highlight just sort of the filmmaking craft for a moment here, because the funeral march and the actual riot were just phenomenal.
Yeah, definitely.
Phenomenal. The way the band played, and I loved the space versions of all those instruments.
Right?
There was just a steampunk French horn, and and somebody took a flute and super glued it to a clarinet, and that was one of the other instruments. And there's a trumpet with some really sharp angles on it. It's great. Loved it. But there that whole the build up to that was like a masterclass in tension building, and it was done so well with Tony Gilroy and Benjamin Caron and everybody who worked on this episode did such a marvelous job building up to that moment. And then you build all that tension and then you release it in that riot, and it was done so well. Everything from the kid throwing the bomb to the people running at the shields and crashing into them, and the chaos that's happening, the stormtroopers shooting, and whenever somebody goes down, you feel it. Like that's something this show has done so well throughout the entire season, is making even the quote unquote unimportant deaths feel impactful, and that was continued in this episode. So while I might have some criticisms for how some of the characters were sort of on the outside looking in for a lot of this, what we actually got was tremendous and absolutely in keeping with the level of quality I've come to expect from Andor over the course of this season.
For sure.
Anything else you guys want to bring up before we head it to the corner and then start to and then check in with the super chats and then start
the
to
post-credit scene?
Oh yeah, let's talk
that
about
was
that.
unexpected. I don't always watch these episodes through all the credits because you end up with all like the international dubbing credits and like all that stuff at the end. It's just kind of pointless. But for some reason, I ended up letting this one play, mainly because I really like the music, the scoring of this show. So I was just kind of letting it play while I was like, checking my phone, seeing what the heck had happened in the last hour while I was watching the episode. and then it's just like came back up. And I'm like, wait, what's going on? And that was incredible. It took me a moment to kind of get what was going on. I had to like rewind it and watch it again. And then I was like, oh, that's really big. So they, confirmed that theory that people had that, on the prison, they were building the Death Star. And, what's really incredible about that is, it's not only just the Death Star, but it's the laser weapon part of the Death Star. So basically you end up in a situation where Cassian literally built the weapon that killed him, which is insane.
Yeah. Andor was really good about not having leaks. The one thing that leaked was this post-credit scene. And it didn't leak until about a week or two ago. I think someone with a screener let the word slip that this was coming. So I was expecting it. I was looking forward to it because it sounded great. But the way it was done, the execution of it was excellent too. And I always watch the credits up until it starts recommending things to you, because that's when you know there's not anything more.
Yeah.
If it doesn't start recommending things to you, usually that means something is coming up down the line. They did a good job with this. I'm still not sold on the whole idea that Star Wars needs post credit scene. I think we can leave that to the other franchises. But if we're gonna do them, I like this style of them best, where it is, yes, it's setting things up for the future, but it's more Easter eggy than essential. Whereas the Mandalorian one and the Book of Boba Fett one felt like ultimately those. I mean, the Mandalorian one set up a whole other freaking TV show, so it was pretty essential. And I feel like the Book of Boba one will wind up.
That's okay. That was terrifying.
Everything all right there, Hannah?
Yes, my light just fell. That's so good.
Okay.
That was terrifying. Woo! All good.
Good.
Oh man.
I was saying that the Book of Boba one I do think will wind up being essential down the line too. That's what I was saying.
Yeah, I think this always kind of,
and the Boba statue fell when you were mentioning Book of Boba Fett.
Oh no.
This kind of brings up the same this thing that we bring up sometimes, which is like how Star Wars is very interesting because it's always kind of built on the assumption that you have seen what comes after it. Almost everything. That really the only thing that doesn't fit within that is the sequels. Like, even to an extent, The Mandalorian, while it has a lot of space to breathe, still has stuff coming after it. You kind of expect the beginnings of the First Order and Kylo Ren and stuff like that. And so, like, it's interesting because it's like, it's an unnecessary scene as almost like an Easter egg if you have seen the rest of Star Wars. But if you haven't, then that's a really fascinating scene because it's hinting at what ends up happening in Rogue One. So it's interesting.
Yeah. Well, I sort of like it. Again, as I was saying earlier, we have to think about Rogue One as the third act of Cassian's story. So we're teasing what is ultimately the end game in Cassian's life and his arc in this little moment. While also just being a, hey, look at that Easter egg for all of us that know what's coming.
And can I just say, I told you guys they were building it for the Death Star. I said this, but I know also like thousands of other people said it as well. But I remember talking about it on the show. I'm like, guys, it's for the Death Star. It's for the Death Star.
You were right.
So, yeah, it's very cool.
As Anakin Skywalker once said, "You were right." So, all right. All right. Well, I think we've about covered the main bulk of the discussion, but we're not done yet. Of course, we're not done yet. You may be thinking, Ben Hart, the Star Wars guy, is not here, so we can't do everybody's favorite segment. But you would be wrong, because it is, of course, time for Ben's Connection Corner. Connections in the corner with Ben. It's Ben's Connection Corner. Do.
How's it going, everybody?
Ben's Connection Corner is filmed in front of a live studio audience. It's as if he's here with us. Ben very kindly sent along his notes for the Connection Corner. He wrote them for himself, so they are not super clear. But we
have we all had an attempt of trying to understand what he's talking about?
Yeah. So here's what we've got for Ben's Connection Corner. We start off with one that I think everybody will get: Lambda class shuttle, classic Imperial shuttle Tidarium's cousin or brother, sister, same ship. One we see in Return of the Jedi. And next to it, we see a Zeta class heavy cargo shuttle parked next to the Lambda. This is the cargo shuttle that the Rogue One team uses to infiltrate Scarif.
Interesting.
Oh, okay. All right.
Sticking with the Rogue One theme, we see the Death Troopers. They're there
That one.
escorting Deidra. Yep, got that. There's an alien in the bar that previously appeared in Maz Kanata's castle.
I think I caught that one. Yes. Was it a short alien? It was like a short little alien. I think
thought
perhaps maybe
was
Ben.
it the guy who's like vaping. There's like a pipe. Is it that guy? I thought that's who that was.
Actually, I mean, just speaking of aliens, what about that? The long nosed alien that was in the fight, that was in the riot. Did we all get that guy?
Yeah, I think that's one that's not in
Yeah,
Ben's notes.
Is this it?
Which
No,
is
dude,
the guy.
I love that guy.
Yeah, in A New Hope, who like rats them out to the Empire. You got the same species.
And the guy that used the flute to call the shuttle for Mando in season 1, episode 1. That guy. Anyway, yeah.
Ben says in the chat he was smoking something. I think that's what I meant. Vaping guy.
Okay, yeah, the vaping guy.
Vaping guy. Continuing, he says Imperial speeders in the streets of Ferrix look similar to the First Order speeders that we see Rey and Finn in the deleted scenes from driving in the Force Awakens. May even be the same prop? ?
Interesting.
So there we go. People are saying the long snout alien is a Kubaz. Kubaz in the chat.
Love it. Thank you.
Ben is wondering if some of the characters in the marching band were playing a clue horn, which if you read from a certain point of view many years ago, you know that there was a great clue horn heist or mystery or something. I got really confused in that short story taking place in the cantina on the day that Luke Skywalker and Ben Kenobi went there. A lot of the Imperial troopers holding back the rioters are wearing armor just like Han Solo wears on Mimban in Solo. It's a good one. Good call. Good catch. Excellent. I like that design. And I like it's very reminiscent of the Kylo Ren helmet. And then we have this one. This one is I'm going to call this an unintentional bit of a connection corner here. The Time Grapplers actor, which I believe is the guy banging the anvil.
Oh, I got to talk about him after this, actually.
Is named Neil Bell. Perfect name.
That's awesome.
Neil Bell.
That is awesome.
There you go. That's what
that guy.
Yeah. You've got feelings about?
Yeah. The Bell guy. How much freaking emphasis did they put on the Bell guy this episode? Holy wow! Like I kind of love it because us Celebration goers was the first thing really that we had seen of Andor was the Bell guy.
Bell guy.
It was this like 10-second clip, and it was the Bell guy like walking up, and he goes up to the bell and he goes, "Dong, dong." Like that's like, there's Andor, better get excited. It's like, what the hell has this Bell guy got to do with it? For months, we imagined the stories and tales of the Bell guy happening in Andor. And, he was fantastic in the premiere. And I love that he didn't open, but he was in the premiere of Andor. And it was quite a big notion, his story of, he started the Bell time. And, everyone kind of joined in, and it's a very rallying thing for Ferrix. So I loved how the story brought us back to Bell guy in this finale. And his bell just kept going this whole escalation in Rix Road, and he was so much of a like important character that main angry Imperial guy was like, "You get him, like kill him," and then the stormtrooper team went to get him, and the Bell guy beat him. Oh, jeez!
Bell guy.
Most exciting part of the finale is just this story of the Bell guy. Jeez.
What a legend. Matthew Hart in the chat says apparently the anvil that the Time Grappler hits is made of Beskar.
I've heard that, yeah.
Little additional bit of Ben's connection corner there. One other Ben's Connection Corner connection that Ben didn't mention in his notes for us. Perrin shouts out Perrin doesn't. Mon Mothma shouts out Canto Bite. Canto Bite.
that's right.
Oh yes,
It's a
that's
reference.
right.
So little bit of sequel era references there as well. So yeah, that'll bring us to the end of the first ever Ben free edition of Ben's Connection Corner. Connections in the corner with Ben. It's Ben's Connection Corner. Do.
How's it going, everybody?
Ben's Connection Corner is filmed in front of a live studio audience.
How's it going, everybody? Oh, so
Well,
good. So
and
good.
Ben did ask me to tell you all that Ben's Connection Corner will return in 2023 for the Bad Batch, the Mandalorian, Ahsoka, and beyond. Ben didn't actually say that, but I'm just gonna make him commit to it now while he's not here.
Oh, I love it.
All right, let's hit some super chats. Actually, before we do a super chat, just while we're still talking about Ben's Connection Corner, we got this great comment earlier from Aviaki dos Lobitos, who says, I was singing the Ben's Connection Corner song out of the blue at work. You've got me hooked.
It's good. It's a banger. It's a banger.
It really is. All right. Let's start the super chats. First up, who else? Joel Davis. Joel says, what is the legacy of this show? Will we get something of this quality ever again? Will Lucasfilm be willing to experiment like this again? How does this impact the other shows moving forward? I think as with any sort of question about legacy, it's still being written. We don't know just yet what the legacy is. It'll depend on does this show grow and gain a new audience between seasons? Do people start checking it out because they missed it when it was on? And does the second season live up to the first? And if it does, and if the show is as successful as I think they hope it to be, then yeah, I think we'll get more stuff that experiments like this. And I think we're going to see that regardless, I think, when The Acolyte comes out, and possibly even with something like Ahsoka when that comes out, because I think that show is going to be very different from what we're used to. So hard to comment on the legacy right now, but I have a good feeling about it.
Yeah, I think the fact that it's happened once suggests it's going to happen again.
Yeah.
I think about when The Mandalorian first came out. That was a very kind of people didn't really fully understand what it was. Star Wars as a TV show, and it took kind of just a little while to really, people to latch onto the idea. But obviously now it's it's this incredible marker of this new age of Star Wars, and many Star Wars fans, more than just Star Wars fans, really revere it as some fantastic storytelling. So I think Andor is doing that. So maybe we don't have the perspective of its influence now, but we will later on.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Next super chat, also from Joel. Season 2 speculation. I predict that we will actually see the inaugural Rebel meeting on Dantooine that was hinted at in Rebel Season 3. Luthen will be there.
That'd be cool.
Have we ever actually seen the Rebel base on Dantooine in anything?
I feel like we saw Dantooine itself somewhere.
Did we?
Yeah. I'm looking up to see where it was.
Like surely it's been in a novel or a comic or something.
I think it was in the Clone Wars show.
Was it?
No, it's Star Wars Rebels. No, Star Wars Rebels.
Okay.
It was in Star Wars Rebels.
Do we actually go there, or do we just see it from afar?
Talk about it.
I thought we went there.
I don't remember it, but I might just be forgetting. Might be a hole in my memory.
Or maybe it's EU stuff, and it was mentioned in Rebels.
That's what I think is more likely, because it wouldn't shock me if they shouted it out on that show. But no, I don't.
Yeah,
recall.
Maybe that's what happened. I mean, there's a bunch of pictures of it, but I think it might be from SWTOR.
Yeah, I think it was definitely a playable place there.
Oh well, this is where it helps to have the Wikipedia broken down between canon and legends.
Mm-hmm. Or are you looking at the Legends page?
No,
Oh.
I'm looking at the canon page to see if it showed up in canon. I mean, it was in. I don't know. There was something going on with the Clone Wars. No. Let's do more research on it.
All right. Well, you find out for us. Report back, and we'll get to the next comment. Also from Joel says season 2 might be the last season, but always remember that Rogue One is the true finale to this series. Yes, we are in complete agreement on that, Joel. Next one comes from Julie Ann Fernie, who says you could say the same with Kanan Jarrus and Cassian. Kanan fought it many times, but came to realize that the rebellion was for the good for all. Sacrifice would be good for the reason. I think this is, again, what we were talking about earlier with, what does Cassian committing to the rebellion, what does that actually mean? And does the fact that he commits at the end of this episode, does that truly mean that he's not doing it for selfish-ish reasons or selfish adjacent reasons? And yeah, I think there's definitely a comparison between Cassian and Kanan. These are two guys that didn't really want to be in the fight, but kept getting drawn in, and ultimately sacrificed themselves for the good of the rebellion. And it's an excellent parallel between Cassian and Kanan. And finally, of course, we'll wrap with one from Joel. Canon is continuing something from Legends that when Palpatine got unlimited power, he got kind of lazy with it and with ruling the Empire. Then after the Empire fell, Palpatine went mask off, full Sith mode, which is, of course, what we see in The Rise of Skywalker. Yeah, I believe it. Palpatine seems like he gets a little lazy in the OT. He's just chilling on his Death Star, chilling in his throne rooms, not really taking an active role in doing much of anything out in the galaxy. Have we got an answer, Chris? Do we know? Have we seen Dantooine before?
I think they were over it. Like in Rebels, they take the ship to it, but they're like orbiting it at the end of the episode because they're supposed to be transporting Mon Mothma to there. But I don't know if they actually go so far as bringing her there, because what happens, and I forgot about this, but this is really big because this is kind of the culmination of what we're seeing in Andor. That was the moment where she officially publicly defected from the Empire, because she gave this speech on the HoloNet for everybody around the whole Empire to see that she was resigning from the Imperial Senate and she had joined the rebellion.
Mm-hmm. I suspect we'll see kind of the other side of the coin of that moment.
That's possible.
In Andor, which would be pretty sweet.
Yeah. It would be really interesting. You know how we've had a lot of moments where we've seen parts of the movies animated in like the Bad Batch and Clone Wars. It would be really interesting to see that speech, but have it in live action.
Oh yeah.
And have it be just a live action reshot of the animation.
That would be fantastic. That'd be really cool. All right. I think it's time to hit final thoughts and scores out of 10 for Rix Road. And if you're feeling like it, the season as a whole. So, Chris, start us off. Final thoughts, score out of 10 for Rix Road and Andor season 1.
This finale met expectations for me. I wouldn't say that it exceeded expectations. It was just as good as I thought it would be. There was nothing really shocking or surprising in it, other than just, I really wasn't sure what direction my mama was going to go, and she went in the darkest possible direction. So that one was kind of the most interesting part of for me, as far as like what I didn't know going in. Everything else kind of played out how you would expect it to play out. So no real like super twists or anything. But it's still super interesting. And they have left a lot for season 2, which I really like. I think a lot of issues sometimes with really good shows is that they write a very good season 1, and they write it in such a way that if season 2 is never made, it's still satisfying.
Yeah.
And so that's good if season 2 doesn't get made, but if it does, it's bad because a lot of times season 2 isn't the same quality as season 1, and further seasons aren't because they didn't really think about setting that stuff up in season 1. They had to kind of reset up all the new plots and things when they get to season 2. This show, it's very obvious that there's going to be a season 2 because there's all these things that we kind of don't know exactly what's going on. We don't know exactly how Syril and Deidra are going to continue to play into this. Are they going to continue hunting Cassian down, or are they going to continue being, the thorn in the rebellion side? What's up with them and how's their relationship going to work? Like, you don't know what's going to happen with Bix. Like, she was rescued. So she still could play into some stuff. So that's interesting. You don't know what's going to happen with Sinta and Vel's relationship and that kind of subplot. And then the really big thing too is we've gotten a lot of backstory behind many of the characters and why they have the motivations that they do. We haven't gotten that for Luthen. He still remains to be a very mysterious character, even after the entirety of season 1. And of course, it was revealed last week that he was very badass with that really incredible space scene where he escaped from the Empire. So clearly this guy is packing a lot. Like, he has a lot of money and resources and skills, and you don't know how many surprises he really has up his sleeve. We still don't really know why he's doing what he's doing. We know that he's willing to go to any ends. We know the personal struggle that it causes him, closing his eyes and seeing ghosts. But yeah, we don't know what happened in his life that got him to the point where he cares so much to defeat the Empire that he's willing to do all this stuff. And I'm wondering if season 2 will get more into his backstory and, explain that a little bit more. So I felt like they did a good job of wrapping certain things up, but still leaving a lot of things floating that haven't been resolved, so that when we come into season 2, it's not going to feel like just a reset and they've kind of made a new plot. It's still the same plot, which I think is pretty brilliant. So it's a great balance of things, a great balance that I'd like to see from a finale, and a very, I would say, just a on point ending for the show that kind of keeps it at the same level that it has been so far. So I would give it a 10 out of 10. Last week was a 9 out of 10. I was actually a little bit bored with the pacing up until the ending. The ending was amazing, but I felt like the show moved a little slow the episode moved a little slow prior to that. So this one is a step up from last week, actually. 10 out of 10.
10 out of 10.
And for the entire season,
10
out of 10.
10 out of 10.
Because you have all these episodes that were 10s out of 10s, and then a few 9s out of 10s, and then one 11 out of 10. So I would say that overall it's a 10 out of 10. It is an absolutely fantastic show. And I would say through and through, it's the best Star Wars show. Like, I think there's moments of other Star Wars shows that are just as good or better. Like the season finale of, it would have been Mandalorian season 2 with that moment with Luke Skywalker is just, I don't think you're ever going to beat that. And then for just a singular moment in Star Wars. And then I'll say it every time I do comparison. Siege of Mandalore is like perfect ending for the series finale of the Clone Wars. But overall, quality wise, episode to episode, all of those shows had their bad moments. Clone Wars and Mandalorian both had missteps at points. I don't feel like the show's had any missteps so far. I feel like every episode has been great. And so it's a 10 out of 10 entire season.
10 out of 10 for the episode and the season from Chris. Hannah, what about you? Final thoughts, score out of 10.
Yeah, I think this finale, I think you said it well, Chris. It's it's what I expected. I feel it's what I anticipated the finale to be. I might be left with a bit more hope of a couple of storylines, but that might just be a greediness of my love of Star Wars, of that I just wanted more. That's kind of coming through there. But I think it was a really solid finale, and the season overall, I keep kind of referring to it as it's like I have two rankings for it. If as a show, if this was just a spy thriller, I think it's probably about a 9 out of 10 for me. But as a Star Wars show, it probably ranks about a 6.5 to 7, probably a 7 out of 10. If I'm in a good mood today, 7 out of 10, a solid 7 out of 10. I think it has so many strengths. It's had so many strengths in terms of its production quality and the acting, the cinematography, the writing, the just everything of the production side of it is almost perfect to me. There's just more questions of the storyline that I have issues with, but that's very subjective, and I very much appreciate that. That is purely just my preference of Star Wars. Is like some things just didn't hit for me, but I have a lot of appreciation for. I think this show is going to impact Star Wars media a lot. I think the experimentative nature of this show and the kind of expansion of what a Star Wars TV show could be, this Andor has done such a positive thing for expanding that definition of a Star Wars TV show outside of Mando and things like that. But so in saying all that, I loved this show and I got excited every time it would come out. A couple of the storylines didn't really hit as amazingly for me, but a solid 7 out of 10 overall for me.
7 out of 10. All right. For me, I will give the finale a 9 out of 10. I thought it did an excellent job at thematically wrapping up the season. I feel like it picked up on the major themes from this season and brought them all together in a really beautiful way. And it just worked. It just worked. As I said earlier, I did feel like a few too many of the characters were passive in the storyline of the finale, and that hurt it a little bit for me. So while I think it's a highly enjoyable episode and a very impactful and emotional one, I think it could have been. I do think it could have been better if the characters had a little bit more to do. So I will hold it back to a 9 out of 10, but still 9 out of 10, pretty damn good. And the season as a whole, also I can go 9.5 out of 10. Really, really something special, something spectacular. The production value, the writing, the storytelling, the characters, the different pacing. I loved how different it was. And I'm going to love going back to the classics when Bad Batch and Mandalorian come back next year. But as something to shake it up every once in a while, I think this show did an excellent job giving us a different take on the Star Wars universe. And that's something that I think we could stand to have more things that are not necessarily like this, but have the same spirit as this, of going, let's do something in Star Wars that we normally wouldn't think about as being a Star War, quote unquote. So Ben, throwing in the chats for his final thoughts, says there were so many high points in the season. It's just hard to say this was the best episode yet, but certainly very strong. Just painful to see it end, but also Death Star. 9 out of 10 for Ben for the episode. And yeah, I'm gonna miss having Andor on our screens every week for a while now. But thankfully, it's just over a month until the Bad Batch comes back. We've got, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks until the Bad Batch season 2 premieres on January 4th on Disney Plus. And if you're looking for more Lucasfilm content in the time in between, check out Willow. There you go. Willow, that'll be fun. I watched Willow for the first time this week, the movie. It's a good little movie.
Yeah, really good. I was surprised. The 1980s was a really interesting time because it seems like a lot of the good movies that came out in the 80s were not really popular in the 1980s. Like, I feel like, Labyrinth is another one, Dark Crystal. is another one. Like there's a lot of really good fantasy movies that came
Yeah.
out of the 1980s that it just weren't real big financial successes and didn't actually become franchises until the Dark Crystal tried to do that with Netflix and failed. But Willow, yeah, is actually a pretty high quality film.
Seems like audiences weren't ready for that sort of epic fantasy on screen, and it wasn't until Peter Jackson got the Lord of the Rings trilogy off the ground that people opened up to it. And then Game of Thrones pushed it even further, and now we're kind of having a bit of a moment of epic fantasy with the Lord of the Rings shows, with the Game of Thrones prequel, and now Willow coming in to be kind of, I guess, the family friendly version of those two, which should be a good time.
Wait,
So
Lord of the Rings isn't family friendly?
I mean, it's pretty violent.
Lord of the Rings was one of those odd exceptions when I was growing up. I really don't know why.
Yeah.
It was like allowed to be family
Hey,
friendly.
I'm not saying it's not Game of Thrones, but it's I would say I'd say it exists in a space between Game of Thrones and Willow. I'd say Willow is a fully
It's more
family
YA.
thing.
Lord of the Rings is more YA.
Yeah.
My family took me to see Return of the King when I was 4 years old, which I don't know how I actually got into the theater. I don't know how they let me into the theater, but I remember seeing Shelob when I was 4 years old. That's a sight you don't forget.
And with that, we have been a Lord of the Rings talk and Willow talk. We can begin to wrap things up for this week.
All right, so that's it for this week. We want to wish everybody in America a happy Thanksgiving, and thank you everybody for listening and watching. We'll be back with another episode, same time, same place next week. And in the meantime, you can follow at the SWU, only on Hive, no other social media accounts, just Hive. That's the only place we are now. We have a deal that hasn't been
do we?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Because Ben is the
Because
owner
Ben.
of
Oh, yeah,
Hive.
that's right. Ben. Yeah. Him and Uncle Harlow.
Yes.
Uncle Ben Harlow.
Yes.
Ben Harlow, the Hive guy.
Oh my gosh.
Doesn't quite work.
They both have
as
the
well.
same melody. Dominic, thank you so much for hosting.
It was my pleasure, as always. Great fun talking about the finale. I'm sad to see Andor end, but it was one hell of a ride, and one that I look forward to revisiting in the weeks, months, and years to come. And season 2 needs to just hurry up and get here. Although, fortunately, we'll have plenty of good stuff in between now and then to keep us to tide us over. The real question, I think, is will we have a Star Wars movie in between seasons of Andor? And
yes,
I think
we
the answer,
will.
I'm gonna say no. Much as I'd like to, I think we'll see Andor back on our screens before we see Star Wars back in the theater, unfortunately. But hey, if it's gonna be this good on TV, then I'm willing to wait. I can't wait to do this next week. Can't wait to finally break down all that news we've been waiting on. It's gonna be another jam-packed show, so you're not gonna want to miss it. We'll see everybody again in 7 days' time.
And you can follow Dominic at DominicJ25, not on Hive.
Not yet, anyways.
Still holding out.
It was more laziness than anything else, really. I just can't be bothered.
Well, Ben's working on that right now. Hannah, thank you for hosting as well.
Thank you so much. It's been a great show, divulging our love of Andor. As much as I can be a little critical, I did really love the discussions that we've had over the past 12 weeks. So much has happened. Who is Uncle Harlow is just plaguing my mind. That's all I'm coming away with after these 12 weeks. But no, it's been such a pleasure. But it'll be great to get into some news. That was it. I feel like we got 5 weeks before Bad Batch. Like, are we going to fit all the news that has happened in 5 weeks? So much has happened. But no, it's going to be great. Such a good conversation today, guys. Good times.
Awesome, and you can follow Hannah on social media at the Raeside, RAE side, and you can follow me at Seek3PO. We want to thank everybody who super chatted with us this week, and everybody who is a supporting channel member, make sure you leave our show a review if you're listening to us on a podcast app, and don't forget to join the SWU Network Discord. Link is in our show notes over at StarWarsUnderworld.com and on the description of our YouTube videos.
And in your podcast show descriptions on your.
Oh,
podcast
that's right. I
list.
forgot that's also a thing. I'm just trying to.
It's like I forgot about the thing where the vast majority of our audience.
I
consumes
can't
the show.
tell you the last time I listened to our show on iTunes or whatever it's called now.
iTunes.
I forgot that there's.
I loaded it up on my iPod and
I said that. Yeah, I've not.
I spun the little clicker wheel until I got to the episode and pressed play.
Hit the shuffle button, the only button on there. Yeah, it's been a while. So make sure you check that out. We'll be back next week. Until then, for Ben and Dominic and Hannah and all the fantastic folks at the Star Wars Underworld, my name is Chris, and may the Force be with you.
Uncle Harlow will have a job for you. Why don't we ask Uncle Harlow?
It's a wrap.